When my daughter-in-law handed me a maid's uniform and a list of daily chores just 3 days after we buried my son Daniel, I realized the sweet woman who'd married him had been wearing a mask all along. But what Veronica didn't know was that I'd spent 35 years as a forensic accountant uncovering hidden assets and financial crimes. And the paper trail I'd discovered in my son's home office would soon teach her exactly why you should never underestimate a grieving mother. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I'll share how one grandmother's courage transformed a nightmare into justice. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and at 72, I thought I'd experienced every kind of loss life could deliver. I'd buried my husband Robert 15 years ago after 43 years of marriage. I'd watched dear friends fade away one by one. I'd navigated the loneliness of widowhood, the challenges of aging, the bittersweet joy of watching my only child build his life while knowing my role in it would gradually diminish. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the phone call that came on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in March. I was in my small apartment in Maplewood, just finishing dinner and settling in with a crossword puzzle, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, and I almost didn't answer. Something, perhaps a mother's instinct that never truly fades, made me pick up. Mrs. Hartwell? This is Dr. Miranda Chen from Riverside General Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Daniel Hartwell. There's been an accident. The words that followed blurred together in a nightmarish symphony. Construction site, equipment failure, massive head trauma, couldn't save him. The crossword puzzle slipped from my fingers, scattering across the floor as I struggled to comprehend what this stranger was telling me. My Daniel, my only child, the boy who used to build elaborate towers with his blocks and grew up to become one of the most respected structural engineers in the city, was gone at 41. Mrs. Hartwell, are you still there? Is there someone who can come be with you? I don't remember what I said or how I ended the call. I only remember staring at the scattered crossword puzzle on my kitchen floor, thinking absurdly that I'd never know what 17 across was supposed to be. My son was dead, and I was looking at a crossword puzzle. The next 72 hours passed in a haze that felt both endless and impossibly brief. Veronica, my daughter-in-law of 8 years, took charge immediately. She appeared at my apartment. Within an hour of the phone call, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Eleanor," she said, gripping my shoulders with manicured hands that trembled slightly. "I've already started making arrangements. You don't need to worry about anything. Just pack a bag and come stay with me. You shouldn't be alone right now, at the time, I was grateful for her efficiency. My mind couldn't process even the simplest decisions. What dress to wear, which photo of Daniel to use for the memorial card, whether to have the service at the funeral home or the church he'd attended. Sporadically, Veronica handled it all with her characteristic precision, making choices with a swift certainty I couldn't muster. She installed me in Daniel's childhood room in their sprawling Willowbrook mansion, a room I'd helped him decorate when they'd first bought the house 5 years ago. He'd insisted on keeping some of his old baseball trophies and model airplanes, much to Veronica's barely concealed irritation. "It's silly, I know," he'd said then, catching her eye roll. "But Mom put so much love into helping me build these. They remind me of good times." Now those same model airplanes hung from the ceiling above the bed where I lay sleepless, trying to understand how my strong, vibrant son could be gone. The funeral itself remains a blur of black clothing and hushed voices. Veronica had arranged everything at Willowbrook Memorial Gardens, the most exclusive funeral home in the county. The flowers were elaborate, the casket expensive, the entire production more like a corporate event than a farewell to the warm, humble man who'd preferred barbecues in the backyard to fancy dinners. I sat in the front row, feeling disconnected from my own body as person after person offered condolences. Veronica stood beside the casket like a sentinel, her black designer dress impeccable, her makeup flawless despite the occasional delicate dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. She accepted sympathy with practiced grace, murmuring appropriate responses while I could barely manage a nod. "Such a tragedy," I heard her tell Daniel's colleague, Marcus Chen. "He was just telling me last week about the new safety protocols he wanted to implement. If only he'd had the chance." Something about that statement nagged at me even through my grief. Daniel had called me the night before his death, and he'd sounded troubled. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Can I come by this weekend? There are some things happening that, well, I'd rather discuss in person." Now I'd never know what had worried him. It wasn't until the third night after the funeral, as the last of the sympathy casseroles had been refrigerated, and the house had fallen into an unnatural quiet, that Veronica revealed her true nature. I was sitting in Daniel's room, holding one of the model planes, a B-52 bomber we'd spent 3 weekends building together when he was 12, when she knocked on the door. "Eleanor, we need to talk." She entered without waiting for a response, and I noticed she'd changed from her morning attire into a crisp business suit. In her hands was a manila folder and what looked like a gray bundle of fabric. "I know this is difficult timing," she began, her voice notably lacking the soft sympathy it had carried for the past 3 days. "But we need to discuss your living arrangements going forward." I set down the model plane carefully, confusion cutting through my grief. "Living arrangements? Veronica, I have my own apartment. I'm only staying here because you insisted—" "Yes, about that." She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress barely depressing under her slight weight. "I've been going through Daniel's papers, and I'm afraid the financial situation is more complex than you might realize. This house has a substantial mortgage, and without Daniel's income," she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What are you saying, Veronica?" "I'm saying that I need to be practical about maintaining this household. I can't afford to support 2 residences." She opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a rental agreement. "I've taken the liberty of terminating the lease on your apartment. It's a waste of money when we have plenty of room here." The words hit me like physical blows. "You terminated my lease? How? You have no authority." "Daniel gave me power of attorney for all family financial matters 2 years ago," she interrupted smoothly. "Given your age and the fact that he was helping you with rent, it made sense for me to handle these things. I've already arranged for your belongings to be packed and moved here." I stared at her, unable to process this violation. Daniel had helped me with rent occasionally when unexpected expenses arose, a kindness I'd accepted reluctantly and always repaid when I could. But full financial control? "Now," Veronica continued, setting the gray bundle on the bed beside me. "Since you'll be living here, we need to discuss how you can contribute to the household. I've prepared a list of duties that will help offset your room and board." She pulled out a typed sheet from the folder, a detailed schedule that included cooking all meals, cleaning the entire house, doing laundry, maintaining the garden, and various other tasks that would essentially make me a full-time domestic servant. "And this," she said, gesturing to the gray bundle, "is a uniform. I find it helps maintain proper boundaries in the household. You'll wear it during working hours, which will be 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily, with Sundays off for church if you still attend." The fabric unfolded to reveal a stereotypical maid's uniform, gray dress, white apron, even a small cap. It was the kind of thing you'd see in an old movie, designed to clearly mark the wearer's status as help rather than family. "Veronica?" I said slowly, my voice shaking with a combination of grief and growing anger. "I am not your employee. I'm Daniel's mother, your mother-in-law." Her expression hardened, all pretense of warmth vanishing like smoke. "Yes, and Daniel is gone. The reality is that you're a 72-year-old woman with limited income and no immediate family besides me. Your choices are simple. Accept this arrangement or find yourself homeless. I doubt your Social Security checks will cover much in today's rental market." "This is what Daniel would have wanted?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "My son would be horrified." "Daniel isn't here to want anything," she replied coldly. "And frankly, Eleanor, he always protected you from harsh realities. Did you know he was paying over half your rent? That he covered your medical bills last year when you had that fall? You've been dependent on him for years, and now that responsibility falls to me. The least you can do is earn your keep." She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced efficiency. "I'll give you tonight to process this. Tomorrow morning, I expect you in the kitchen at 6 a.m. to prepare breakfast. The cleaning supplies are in the utility closet, and I've left a cookbook on the counter with the meals I expect this week. Oh, and Eleanor? I prefer my eggs over easy." With that, she left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded final. I sat on the bed, surrounded by my son's childhood memories, holding a maid's uniform while trying to comprehend how my grief had been compounded by this unexpected cruelty. But as I sat there, something else began to stir beneath the shock and sorrow. The same instinct that had served me well during 35 years as a forensic accountant. Veronica had made several claims about Daniel's finances and their legal arrangements. In my experience, when someone moved this quickly to establish control after a death, there was usually something they were trying to hide. I looked around Daniel's room with new eyes. He'd been worried about something in the days before his death. He'd wanted to talk to me about something important, and now his widow was trying to reduce me to servitude while claiming financial hardship in a house worth at least $2 million. My fingers found the model airplane again, the B-52 bomber. Daniel had loved how it looked delicate but was actually incredibly sturdy, designed to withstand tremendous pressure. "Just like you, Mom," he'd said when we'd finished it. "Stronger than you look." I folded the maid's uniform carefully and set it aside. Tomorrow, I would play along with Veronica's demands. I would cook her breakfast and clean her house. But I would also do what I did best, follow the paper trail. Because in 35 years of investigating financial crimes, I'd learned that people who grabbed for control this quickly after a death were usually hiding something significant. And if Veronica thought grief had made me weak, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. A forensic accountant never truly retires. We just find new puzzles to solve. And the puzzle of why my daughter-in-law was so eager to reduce me to servitude while claiming poverty was one I intended to investigate thoroughly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Patricia Wong, my former colleague who now ran her own private investigation firm. I typed out a simple message. "Pat, I may need your help. Something isn't right here." Her response came within minutes. "Whatever you need, Eleanor. Daniel was a good man. If someone's dishonoring his memory, we'll find out." I tucked the phone away and looked once more at the uniform Veronica expected me to wear. Let her think she'd won. Let her believe grief had broken me. She was about to learn what happened when you cornered a forensic accountant who had nothing left to lose but her son's legacy. The rain that had marked the day of Daniel's death continued to fall, pattering against the windows like tears. But beneath my sorrow, a different emotion was taking root: determination. Veronica had made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed that age and grief made me helpless. She'd forgotten that before I was Daniel's mother, before I was Robert's widow, I was Eleanor Hartwell, the woman who'd uncovered a $12 million embezzlement scheme at Hartridge Industries, who'd testified in federal court against corporate executives who thought they were untouchable, who'd built a reputation for finding the truth no matter how deeply it was buried. Tomorrow, I would begin my performance as her servant, but I would also begin my investigation. And when I found what I was looking for, because I would find it, Veronica would discover that the elderly woman she'd tried to diminish was far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. The model airplane cast shadows on the ceiling as I finally lay down, my mind already cataloging what I'd need to investigate: financial records, legal documents, Daniel's work files, insurance policies, all the pieces that would tell the real story of what was happening in this house. "I'll find the truth, Daniel," I whispered to the darkness. "I promise you that." Outside, thunder rolled across Willowbrook, and I closed my eyes, ready to begin the most important investigation of my life. Veronica wanted a servant. What she was getting was something far more dangerous. A mother's love armed with 35 years of professional experience in uncovering the lies people told when they thought no one was watching. The game had begun, and Veronica had no idea she was playing against a master. The alarm I'd set for 5:30 a.m. was unnecessary. I'd been awake since 4, staring at the ceiling and planning my approach. In my career as a forensic accountant, I'd learned that the key to any successful investigation was patience and meticulous attention to detail. Criminals, whether corporate embezzlers or calculating widows, always left traces. They couldn't help themselves. I dressed in the gray uniform Veronica had provided, my fingers trembling slightly as I fastened the buttons, not from fear or humiliation, but from suppressed rage. Each button was a reminder of how quickly she'd moved to diminish me, how prepared she'd been for this moment. The uniform fit surprisingly well, suggesting she'd been planning this transformation, long before Daniel's death. By 5:45, I was in the kitchen, familiarizing myself with the layout. Veronica's house, I could no longer think of it as Daniel's home, was equipped with every high-end appliance imaginable. The refrigerator alone probably cost more than 6 months of the rent she claimed they couldn't afford for my apartment. I noted the contradiction and filed it away. I prepared her breakfast precisely as specified. Eggs over easy, whole wheat toast lightly buttered, fresh squeezed orange juice, and coffee with 1 sugar and oat milk. I'd learned long ago that when you're gathering intelligence, you become invisible by being exactly what people expect to see. Veronica wanted a compliant servant? I'd give her one, at least on the surface. She appeared at exactly 6:30, dressed in another designer suit, this one navy blue with subtle pinstripes. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She surveyed the breakfast setting with a critical eye before taking her seat. "The eggs are acceptable," she said after her first bite, as if grading a student's performance. "Tomorrow, make sure the toast is slightly more golden. And Eleanor, the uniform looks appropriate. Please remember to wear the cap as well." I retrieved the small white cap from my pocket and pinned it to my gray hair, completing my transformation. From mother-in-law to domestic help. "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell." "Veronica," she corrected sharply. "You'll address me as Ms. Chambers. I've decided to return to my maiden name professionally. Less complicated for business matters." Another red flag. Widows who immediately abandoned their married names often had reasons beyond professional convenience. I made a mental note to investigate her business dealings under both names. "Yes, Ms. Chambers," I replied, refilling her coffee cup with steady hands that betrayed none of my racing thoughts. As she ate, she reviewed my schedule for the day. "After breakfast, you'll clean the master suite. I've left instructions on the dresser about how I prefer things arranged, then the bathrooms, followed by vacuuming the entire first floor. Lunch should be ready by noon sharp. I'll be working from home today, so please maintain quiet while cleaning. Dinner at 6:30. She pushed a credit card across the table. "This is for household expenses only. Every purchase must be documented with receipts. I'll review them weekly." I pocketed the card, noting it was a basic debit card rather than one of the premium credit cards I'd seen her use before. Another control mechanism, likely with a minimal balance to prevent me from having any financial autonomy. After she retreated to her home office, I began my assigned tasks, but with a dual purpose. Cleaning gave me access to every corner of the house, and I intended to use that access wisely. My 35 years in forensic accounting had taught me that people hide their secrets in predictable places, believing themselves cleverer than they actually are. The master suite yielded the first interesting discovery. While dusting the bookshelf, I noticed a section of financial planning books that seemed well thumbed. Between Smart Women Finish Rich and The Millionaire Next Door was a slim journal. I carefully photographed each page with my phone before replacing it exactly as found. The entries were cryptic, but revealing. Dates, initials, and dollar amounts that suggested some kind of financial timeline. In the walk-in closet, while organizing Veronica's extensive wardrobe as per her instructions, I discovered a locked filing cabinet partially hidden behind her evening gowns. The lock was substantial, not something you'd use for normal household documents. I made note of the brand and model, knowing from experience that such locks often indicated documents someone very much wanted to keep private. The master bathroom provided another clue. Behind the toilet, easily missed if you weren't thorough, in cleaning, was a small wastebasket containing shredded documents. Most people don't realize that professional investigators can reconstruct shredded papers, especially if they're only strip-cut rather than cross-cut. I carefully collected the strips in a plastic bag from my cleaning supplies, tucking it away for later examination. As I worked, memories of my career flooded back. My expertise hadn't developed overnight. It had been forged through decades of challenging cases that others had deemed impossible. I thought about the Hartridge Industries case that had made my reputation. The CEO, William Hartridge, had been siphoning money through a complex web of shell companies for over a decade. Everyone, including federal investigators, had been stumped by his seemingly airtight accounting. But I'd noticed something others missed: tiny discrepancies in the depreciation schedules of assets that supposedly didn't exist. It had taken me 6 months of painstaking work, often staying at the office until midnight, cross-referencing thousands of documents. Robert would bring me dinner, sitting quietly while I worked, understanding that this was more than a job for me. It was a calling. "You see patterns others can't," he'd told me one night as I finally cracked the code that would send Hartridge to federal prison. "It's like you can read the story the numbers are trying to tell." That ability had served me well throughout my career. I'd uncovered embezzlement schemes at 3 major nonprofits, revealed Medicare fraud that saved taxpayers millions, and testified as an expert witness in dozens of cases. My reputation had been built on an absolute refusal to be intimidated by powerful people who thought their wealth made them untouchable. Now, as I scrubbed Veronica's already spotless bathroom tiles, I was drawing on every skill I'd developed. The house was telling me a story. I just needed to piece it together. By noon, I had completed the morning's cleaning tasks and prepared lunch, a Caesar salad with grilled chicken, exactly as specified on Veronica's menu plan. She emerged from her office looking pleased with herself, checking her phone with a slight smile. "The house looks acceptable," she said, surveying my work. "You may eat your lunch in the kitchen after I'm finished. I've left a list of approved foods for your meals, mostly leftovers and basic items. We can't have you developing expensive tastes on my budget." As she ate, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and her expression shifted to something I could only describe as predatory satisfaction. "Marcus, darling," she purred into the phone. "Yes, I received the documentation. Of course, we need to move quickly. No, there won't be any complications from that quarter. Yes, Thursday works perfectly. The Oriental Club at 7? Marcus." The name was familiar. Marcus Chen, one of Daniel's colleagues from the engineering firm. He'd been at the funeral, looking genuinely devastated. Now he was making dinner plans with the widow barely a week later. After lunch, while Veronica returned to her office, I tackled the afternoon cleaning with renewed purpose. The guest bedrooms yielded nothing significant, but Daniel's former home office was a goldmine of potential information. Veronica had clearly been through it. Empty spaces on the bookshelves and in the filing cabinet suggested documents had been removed, but she hadn't been thorough. Behind a family photo on the desk, I found a USB drive taped to the back of the frame. It was small, easily missed, and labeled simply Backup 315 in Daniel's neat handwriting. March 15th, 2 weeks before his death. I pocketed it quickly, my heart racing. Whatever was on that drive, Daniel had hidden it for a reason. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath some old tax returns, I discovered something even more intriguing. A business card for a private investigator named James Morrison, with a handwritten note on the back. Re-V Financial History. Call Monday. The Monday referenced would have been the day after Daniel died. He'd been investigating his own wife. As I vacuumed the first floor, moving systematically through each room, I reflected on what I was uncovering. Daniel had suspected something about Veronica. He'd been gathering evidence, planning to hire a professional investigator. His urgent need to talk to me that final weekend suddenly made terrible sense. He'd discovered something and needed advice from someone he trusted, someone with expertise in financial crimes. The dining room was my next discovery site. While polishing the mahogany table, I noticed scratches on the floor beneath, as if heavy furniture had been moved recently. The china cabinet that should have covered those scratches was positioned several inches to the left. I carefully moved it back and found a small hole in the wall behind it, the kind left when a wall safe has been removed. A wall safe that was no longer there. More evidence of Veronica's rapid asset reorganization. By the time I was preparing dinner, herb-crusted salmon with asparagus and wild rice, I had cataloged dozens of small anomalies throughout the house. Missing artwork that left telltale fade marks on walls. Empty spaces in the wine cellar's inventory log. A high-end watch window in the master bedroom that no longer held any watches. Veronica had been systematically liquidating assets, all while claiming financial hardship. "Dinner smells adequate," Veronica announced as she entered the kitchen, having changed into designer loungewear that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "I'll take it in the dining room. You may eat in the kitchen after. You've served me and cleaned up." As I plated her meal with the precision she demanded, I thought about the patterns emerging from my observations. Asset liquidation, secret meetings with Daniel's colleague, hidden documents, a wall safe removed. These weren't the actions of a grieving widow struggling with finances. They were the calculated moves of someone executing a long-planned strategy. After serving her dinner and retreating to the kitchen, I finally allowed myself a moment to eat, though I had little appetite. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket, its contents a mystery that might explain everything. But I couldn't risk examining it here. Veronica might have monitoring software on the computers, or she might simply walk in unexpectedly. "Eleanor." Veronica's voice cut through my thoughts. "This salmon is overcooked. In the future, I expect better attention to detail. That's why you're here, after all. To maintain standards." I appeared in the dining room doorway, maintaining my servile posture. "I apologize, Ms. Chambers. I'll be more careful tomorrow." She studied me with cold eyes, perhaps looking for signs of rebellion or resentment. I gave her nothing but the appearance of a broken old woman grateful for shelter. It was a performance. Worthy of my most challenging testimonies, when defense attorneys had tried to portray me as confused or incompetent because of my age. They'd learned, to their client's detriment, that underestimating me was a costly mistake. "See that you do," she said finally. "And Eleanor, I'll need you to do some additional tasks tomorrow. The garage needs organizing, and I want you to go through Daniel's remaining belongings. Separate anything of value from the sentimental garbage. We'll be having an estate sale soon." An estate sale. She was moving even faster than I'd anticipated. Most widows couldn't bear to part with their spouse's belongings for months or even years. Veronica was ready to sell them within a week. "Of course, Ms. Chambers," I replied. "I'll make a detailed inventory." "No need," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Just sort things into keep and dispose piles. I'll handle the inventory myself." Another red flag. Anyone legitimately concerned about finances would want a detailed inventory for tax and sales purposes. Unless, of course, they plan to sell valuable items privately and pocket the cash without proper documentation. That evening, after completing my kitchen duties and enduring Veronica's final inspection of my work, I was finally dismissed to my room at 8 p.m. sharp. I sat on Daniel's childhood bed, surrounded by the models and trophies that Veronica would no doubt soon consign to the garbage, and carefully reviewed everything I'd observed. The picture forming was one I'd seen before in various incarnations. Throughout my career, a carefully orchestrated financial manipulation, likely planned long before the victim's death. But I needed more evidence, needed to understand the full scope of what Veronica had done and was planning to do. I pulled out my phone and opened the message from Patricia Wong. Her response was immediate. "Free tomorrow evening. Can meet at A, the Riverside Diner at 9 p.m. Come alone. Watch for tails." The old protocols came back naturally. Patricia and I had worked together on several cases where the subjects had connections to dangerous people. The fact that she was suggesting security measures told me she'd already done some preliminary research into Veronica. As I prepared for bed, still wearing the demeaning uniform that marked my supposed fall from family member to servant, I thought about Daniel. He'd inherited my analytical mind but paired it with his father's trusting heart. It had made him a wonderful son and a successful engineer, but it had also made him vulnerable to someone like Veronica, someone who could wear a mask of love while plotting something far darker. "I'm going to find out what she did to you," I whispered to his picture on the nightstand, a photo from his college graduation, his smile bright with promise and hope. "And when I do, she's going to learn what happens when you underestimate a mother's love." Tomorrow, I would continue my performance as Eleanor the servant. But tonight, Eleanor the forensic accountant was fully awakened, and she had the scent of financial crime in her nostrils. Veronica thought she'd reduced me to nothing more than hired help. In reality, she'd given me exactly what I needed: unlimited access to her home, her routines, and eventually, her secrets. The game was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. And while Veronica slept peacefully in her master suite, confident, in her control, I lay awake planning my next moves. 35 years of professional experience had taught me that the most dangerous opponent is the one you don't see coming, the one you've dismissed as harmless. By the time I was finished, Veronica would understand that the elderly woman she'd tried to break was actually the one person she should have feared most. Because I had nothing left to lose except the truth about my son's death, and I would burn down her entire carefully constructed world to find it. To understand the depth of Veronica's betrayal, you need to know who Daniel truly was and the life we'd built before she entered our world. My son wasn't just another successful engineer. He was a man who understood that true wealth lay in relationships, integrity, and using your gifts to make the world better. The next morning, as I prepared Veronica's breakfast at 6 a.m. sharp, eggs, over easy with slightly more golden toast as instructed, my mind drifted to happier times. Daniel had inherited his father's gentle nature and my analytical mind, a combination that made him exceptional in unexpected ways. "The table setting is acceptable," Veronica noted as she entered, checking her phone. "Today, I need you to focus on the garage and Daniel's belongings as discussed. I have client meetings all morning, so maintain absolute quiet. Lunch at noon, dinner at 6:30. "Yes, Ms. Chambers," I replied, refilling her coffee cup while she scrolled through messages, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. After she retreated to her office, I made my way to the garage, ostensibly to sort through Daniel's things, but really to understand the man he'd been before Veronica's influence. The garage was a treasure trove of memories, boxes labeled in his neat handwriting, dating back to college and beyond. I started with a box marked MIT years and found myself holding his acceptance letter from 18 years ago. I remembered that day vividly. Daniel bursting through our front door, waving the envelope, his face radiant with joy. Robert had lifted him in a bear hug, tears streaming down both their faces, while I stood back capturing the moment in my heart. "I'm going to build things that matter, Mom," he'd said that night over celebratory dinner. "Not just structures, but things that help people." He'd kept that promise. Inside the box were notebooks filled with design sketches, not just of buildings, but of innovative solutions for accessibility, ramps that were both functional and beautiful, modular housing designed for disaster relief, structural systems that could withstand earthquakes while remaining cost-effective for developing nations. 1. Folder caught my attention. Senior year thesis, dedicated to Dad. I opened it carefully, finding his project on sustainable community centers for underserved neighborhoods. In the dedication, he'd written, "To my father, Robert Hartwell, who taught me that strength isn't just about what can bear the most weight, but what can lift others up. And to my mother, Eleanor, who showed me that true foundations are built on integrity." I had to pause, overwhelmed by the memory of his graduation. Robert had been fighting cancer by then, weak from chemo but determined. To see his son walk across that stage, Daniel had dedicated his valedictorian speech to us, speaking about how his parents had shown him that success meant nothing if it wasn't used to benefit others. The next box contained documents from his early career at Steinberg Associates, the prestigious engineering firm that had recruited him straight from MIT. But what struck me wasn't his rapid promotions or glowing performance reviews, it was the collection of thank you letters paper-clipped together. One from a community center in Bridgeport. "Dear Mr. Hartwell, thanks to your pro bono structural assessment, we were able to secure funding for repairs. You've saved our after-school program that serves 200 children daily." Another from a small church. "Daniel, your volunteer work designing our wheelchair accessibility renovation has changed lives. Mrs. Patterson cried when she could finally attend services again after 5 years." This was who my son had been. Brilliant enough to command top dollar for his expertise, but generous enough to give it freely to those who needed it most. He'd spent weekends volunteering, evenings mentoring engineering students from disadvantaged backgrounds, always finding ways to use his gifts for others. "Excuse me?" Veronica's sharp voice made me jump. She stood in the garage doorway, having approached silently. I thought I was clear about simply sorting items, not taking trips down memory lane. "I apologize, Ms. Chambers," I said, quickly closing the folder. I was trying to determine what might have value for the estate sale. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed the thank you letters. "Sentimental garbage, as I said. Put all of that in the disposal pile. We need to focus on items with actual monetary value." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Eleanor, I'll be monitoring your progress via the security cameras. Please stay on task." Security cameras in the garage. I hadn't noticed those before. I made a mental note to locate all surveillance devices in the house. After she left, I continued, sorting, but now with the knowledge that I was being watched. Still, I managed to discreetly photograph several documents that seemed significant, including some financial records from his early career that showed consistent charitable donations, 10% of his gross income every year without fail. The most revealing box was labeled simply Dad. Inside were hundreds of items related to Robert. Photos, cards, the watch Robert had worn every day until he gave it to Daniel for his 21st birthday, and a leather journal. I opened it carefully, recognizing Daniel's handwriting evolving from teenage scrawl to adult precision. The entries spanned years, starting just after Robert's diagnosis. Daniel had used the journal to record conversations with his father, lessons learned, memories he wanted to preserve. One entry from shortly, before Robert's death stood out. "Dad told me today that Mom is the strongest person he knows. She sees through people's facades," he said. "Watches, analyzes, protects. She's done it our whole marriage, keeping us safe from those who would take advantage." Promise me you'll always listen to her instincts about people. I promised, but told him I hoped I'd inherited enough of her ability to spot deception on my own. He laughed and said, "Son, that kind of wisdom takes decades to develop. Until then, trust your mother." I closed the journal, my hands shaking. Daniel had trusted me, had wanted to talk to me before his death. But Veronica had been there first, weaving her web of control and deception. When had he stopped following his father's advice? When had her influence grown stronger than a lifetime of family wisdom? The afternoon brought more discoveries as I moved through boxes of his professional life. Awards for innovative design, patents for engineering solutions that prioritized safety and accessibility. Business plans for the nonprofit he'd dreamed of starting, an organization that would provide free structural assessments for low-income homeowners. But it was a box labeled 2016-2017 that made my blood run cold. This was the year he'd met Veronica. The change in the documented life was stark. Early in the year, there were plans for the nonprofit, correspondence with other engineers about collaborative community projects, ticket stubs from baseball games with friends. By year's end, these had been replaced by receipts from expensive restaurants, photos from exclusive galas, and business cards from wealth management firms. One document particularly caught my attention, a draft email to me that had apparently never been sent, dated December 2016. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about Veronica. I know you have concerns, and I understand why. She's different from anyone I've dated before. Ambitious, sophisticated, knows exactly what she wants from life. She says I've been thinking too small, that with my talents I could build an empire instead of just giving my skills away. She might be right. The nonprofit can wait. First, I need to establish myself financially." Veronica says, the email ended there, unfinished. But those final two words, Veronica says, showed how quickly her influence had taken hold. My son, who had never cared about wealth beyond having enough to live comfortably and help others, was suddenly talking about building empires. I found our family photo albums in another box, and despite the security cameras, I couldn't help but linger over them. Pictures of Daniel as a baby, taking his first steps toward Robert's outstretched arms. His first day of school, clutching his dinosaur backpack. Science fair victories, baseball games, family vacations to modest beach rentals where we built sandcastles and collected shells. There was a photo from his high school graduation where he stood between Robert and me, one arm around each of us, his smile genuine and warm. We looked like what we were, a close-knit family who found joy in each other's company. No designer clothes, no expensive jewelry, just three people who loved each other deeply. The contrast with photos from recent years was jarring. The family pictures became fewer, then stopped altogether. The last photo of the three of us together was from Robert's final Christmas, just months before he died. Daniel looked tired, divided between his dying father and his demanding girlfriend. Veronica had insisted on spending Christmas Eve at an exclusive party, allowing Daniel only Christmas morning with us. "She needs me there for networking," he'd explained apologetically. "These connections could be important for my career." Robert and I had exchanged glances but said nothing. We'd learned by then that expressing concerns about Veronica only made Daniel defensive. But after he left that morning, Robert had said quietly, "We're losing him, Ellie." I'd held my dying husband's hand and promised we weren't, that Daniel would find his way back to us. But Robert had been right. The son who visited became a stranger who called. The young man who'd spent every free moment at his father's bedside during previous hospitalizations became someone who was always tied up with work obligations that seemed to coincidentally align with Veronica's social calendar. A folder marked "Wedding Plans" provided the final piece of the transformation puzzle. The initial plans, in Daniel's handwriting, were for a modest ceremony at our family church, followed by a reception in the community hall. the same place where Robert and I had celebrated our wedding 35 years earlier. Guest list, maybe 60 people, mostly family and close friends. But those plans had been crossed out, replaced by Veronica's elaborate vision, a destination wedding in the Bahamas, guest list of 300, mostly her contacts, a budget that made my eyes water. Daniel's note in the margin. V says this is an investment in our future. The connections we make will pay for themselves. They'd compromised on a country club wedding for 200 people. I remembered that day, feeling lost in a sea of strangers while Veronica worked the room like a politician, introducing Daniel not as the man she loved, but as one of the city's most promising engineering talents. The boy who'd built model airplanes in his bedroom had become a networking asset. "How's the sorting going?" Veronica's voice crackled through, an intercom I hadn't noticed. "I need you to finish up and start dinner prep in 30 minutes. "Almost done, Ms. Chambers," I replied to the air, unsettled by this evidence of how closely she was monitoring me. I quickly photographed the rest of the significant documents and returned to my assigned task. By the time Veronica appeared to inspect my work, I had two neat areas: items for disposal and those with potential value. The distinction broke my heart. In the disposal pile, his baseball trophies, model airplanes, volunteer appreciation plaques, family photos. In the value pile, his MIT diploma, professional awards, expensive watches I'd never seen him wear, cufflinks still in their boxes. "Good," she said, surveying the piles. "Have the disposal items bagged and at the curb for tomorrow's garbage pickup. The valuable pieces can go in the dining room for now." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Eleanor, I noticed you spending considerable time looking through photo albums. While I understand the temptation, please remember you're here to work, not reminisce. Your efficiency rating for today has been noted." Efficiency rating. As if I were an appliance to be evaluated rather than a grieving mother. I bit back my response and simply nodded. "Yes, Ms. Chambers." That evening, as I prepared dinner, coq au vin, one of Veronica's more elaborate menu demands, I reflected on what I'd learned. The boxes in the garage had shown me the complete arc of my son's life, the idealistic young man full of dreams about helping others, and his gradual transformation into someone who spoke of building empires and making connections. But they'd also shown me something else. That draft email proved Daniel had experienced doubts about Veronica's influence. The hidden USB drive suggested those doubts had eventually grown into suspicion. He'd been planning to investigate her, to call me, to perhaps find his way back, to who he truly was. The timing of his death, just as he was beginning to question things, seemed too convenient. An accident at a construction site where he was doing a routine inspection. A piece of equipment that failed catastrophically despite regular maintenance. No witnesses to exactly what happened. I'd accepted it as a tragic accident because the alternative was unthinkable. But now, surrounded by evidence of Veronica's calculating nature and rapid asset liquidation, I wondered if I'd been naive. How many coincidences could stack up before they stopped being coincidental? As I plated Veronica's dinner with the precise presentation she demanded, I thought about the photo albums now bagged for garbage collection, the official record of Daniel's life, deemed worthless by the woman who claimed to have loved him. But I wouldn't let them be thrown away. Tonight, after Veronica retired, I would retrieve them. Some things were worth any risk. "The coq au vin is acceptable," Veronica pronounced after her first bite. "Though next time, ensure the sauce is slightly thicker. I shouldn't have to provide such basic instruction to someone your age." "My apologies, Ms. Chambers. I'll make a note of your preference." She studied me across the table. "You were quite thorough in the garage today. Find anything interesting?" The question seemed casual, but I'd learned to recognize when I was being tested. "Only memories, Ms. Chambers. Nothing of significance to anyone but me." "Memories," she repeated, swirling her wine, a $300 bottle of Bordeaux that would have horrified Daniel, who preferred local craft beer. Yes, I suppose that's all you have left now. How sad to outlive your only child. To have nothing remaining but memories and the charity of your daughter-in-law. The cruelty was so calculated, so precise, that it actually helped rather than hurt. This wasn't grief making her callous. This was her true nature, finally unveiled. Every cruel word strengthened my resolve to uncover whatever she was hiding. Yes, Ms. Chambers, I said simply. Very sad. That night, after completing my duties and being dismissed to my room, I waited until the house was silent before creeping back to retrieve the photo albums. But when I reached the garage, the bags were already gone. The security footage would show me looking for them, but I didn't care. Let her see my small rebellion. She'd already taken everything else. My son, my autonomy, my dignity. She wouldn't take my memories, too. Back in my room, I sat on Daniel's bed and opened my phone to review the photos I'd taken throughout the day. Financial records, personal. Documents, the evolution of a life from promise to tragedy. Somewhere in these digital fragments was the key to understanding what had really happened. Tomorrow, I would meet Patricia at the diner. Together, we'd begin unraveling Veronica's web. But tonight, I mourned not just for the son I'd lost, but for the man he'd been becoming again before his death. The one who'd hidden that USB drive, who'd kept an investigator's business card, who'd wanted desperately to talk to his mother about something important. I'm going to find the truth, I whispered to the darkness. And when I do, Veronica will learn what happens when you destroy a good man and then try to erase his memory. The foundation of our family had been built on love, integrity, and service to others. Veronica had tried to demolish it, to rebuild it in her own image of ambition and greed. But foundations built on solid ground don't crumble easily, and the forensic accountant in me was about to show her just how strong our foundation really was. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs when Daniel first brought Veronica to meet us. But grief has a way of coloring memories, and I need to be honest about how skillfully she played her role in those early days. The woman who would eventually hand me a maid's uniform had first appeared at our doorstep bearing expensive wine and a perfectly calibrated smile. It was October 2016, 6 months after Robert's death. I was still navigating the strange terrain of widowhood, where every daily routine felt like a betrayal of our 43 years together. Daniel had been my anchor during those months, visiting every weekend, calling daily, making sure I ate proper meals and didn't sink too deeply into isolation. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," he'd said during one of our Wednesday phone calls. "Her name is Veronica Chambers. We've been seeing each other for about 2 months, and it's getting serious." The happiness in his voice had lifted my spirits. After watching his father fade away, after carrying so much weight on his young shoulders, Daniel deserved love and joy. "Bring her for Sunday dinner," I'd said, already planning the menu. "I'll make your favorite pot roast." That first meeting was a masterclass in manipulation, though I wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. Veronica arrived precisely on time, dressed in an elegant but understated wrap dress that suggested sophistication without ostentation. Her gift of wine, a 2012 Chateau Margaux, was excessive for a casual Sunday dinner, but she presented it with such apparent warmth that it seemed generous rather than calculating. "Mrs. Hartwell," she'd said, taking both my hands in hers. "Daniel has told me so much about you. I'm so sorry for your recent loss. He speaks of his father with such love. Robert must have been an extraordinary man." The fact that she knew Robert's name, that she acknowledged my grief directly, but gently, immediately put me at ease. So many people avoided mentioning Robert, as if ignoring his absence might make it easier. Veronica faced it head-on, which felt like kindness at the time. During dinner, she demonstrated a remarkable ability to draw me out of my shell. She asked about my career, seeming genuinely fascinated by my work in forensic accounting. "How exciting," she'd said, leaning forward with apparent interest. Like solving puzzles, but with real-world consequences. Daniel mentioned you testified. In the Hartridge case, I remember reading about that. You must have incredible attention to detail. She praised my cooking with specific compliments that felt sincere. She noticed the family photos on the mantel and asked about them, letting me share memories of happier times. When I mentioned Robert's love of literature, she lit up. I minored. In English, what were his favorite authors? By the end of the evening, I was charmed. Here was an intelligent, accomplished woman who seemed to genuinely care about our family history and values. When Daniel walked her to her car, I watched from the window as they kissed goodbye. A tender moment that made me smile for the first time in months. She's wonderful, I told Daniel when he came back inside. How did you meet? At a charity gala for the Children's Hospital, he said, helping me clear the dishes. She was representing her pharmaceutical company. They were major sponsors. We started talking about the engineering challenges of the new wing they're building, and she actually understood the technical aspects. She's brilliant, Mom. Over the following weeks, Veronica became a regular presence in our lives. She joined us for Sunday dinners, always bringing thoughtful gifts. A cookbook she thought I'd enjoy, a scarf in Robert's favorite color to remember him by, a digital photo frame preloaded with family pictures she'd asked Daniel to share. She seemed to intuit exactly what I needed. When I mentioned struggling with Robert's study, unable to face sorting his books and papers, she offered to help. Only if you're comfortable, she'd said gently. I know how personal these things are, but sometimes having company makes difficult tasks easier. We spent a Saturday afternoon going through Robert's things, and Veronica was perfect. Respectful, patient, letting me tell stories about various items without rushing. When I broke down crying over his annotated copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, she simply sat beside me, offering tissues and quiet support. Daniel is so lucky to have you, she said that day. The way you and Robert raised him, with such strong values and genuine kindness, it shows in everything he does. I hope I can be part of continuing that legacy. The word legacy should have been my first real warning. Who thinks in such terms after dating someone for only a few months? But I was vulnerable, lonely, and desperate to believe that Daniel had found someone who appreciated what our family represented. Her integration into our lives was seamless. She remembered every detail I shared, following up on concerns I'd mentioned in passing. When I admitted I was nervous about managing Robert's life insurance paperwork, she recommended her financial advisor. When I mentioned the house felt too empty, she suggested I consider taking in a graduate student as a boarder for company. You have so much wisdom to share, she'd said. Some young person pursuing their education would be lucky to learn from you. Looking back, I can see how she was gathering intelligence. Every story about our family history, every detail about our finances, every revelation about Daniel's character, she was building a comprehensive picture of what she was dealing with. But at the time, it felt like genuine interest and care. The first subtle shift came around Christmas, 3 months after we'd met. Daniel mentioned they were attending a series of holiday parties, corporate events, pharmaceutical industry gatherings, networking opportunities. 5 parties in 1 week? I'd asked, surprised. Daniel had always been more comfortable in small gatherings than large social events. Veronica says it's important for my career, he explained. She knows all these influential people who could be valuable connections. Did you know her mentor is on the board at Steinberg Associates? She thinks she could arrange for me to meet him. I noticed the phrase, Veronica says, but didn't think much of it then. Young men in love often deferred to their partner's judgment. But the holiday season that had always been family-focused became a whirlwind of professional obligations. Daniel missed our traditional cookie-baking day for a pharmaceutical executive's cocktail party. Christmas Eve services were cut short so they could attend the mayor's holiday gala. I'm sorry, Mom, Daniel said, looking genuinely torn. Veronica. Arranged for us to sit at the CFO's table. She says these relationships could lead to major contracts for the firm. When did my son start caring about sitting at CFO tables? When did contracts become more important than traditions? But I smiled and said I understood, not wanting to be the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't accept change. Veronica must have sensed my disappointment because she showed up on Christmas morning with an elaborate gift basket and profuse apologies. I hate that we're taking Daniel away from family time, she said, seeming genuinely distressed. It's just that these opportunities don't come often, and I want to help him achieve everything he's capable of. She stayed for Christmas breakfast, charming and warm, helping me cook and clean, sharing stories about her own family's traditions. When Daniel opened his gifts, mostly books and practical items, our family's usual approach, she didn't comment on their modest nature. But I noticed her mentally cataloging everything, those sharp eyes missing nothing. The engagement came fast, Valentine's Day, barely 4 months after they'd met. Daniel called me, breathless with excitement. She said, "Yes, Mom. We're getting married." I offered congratulations, trying to match his joy despite my concerns about the rapid timeline. When they came for dinner to celebrate, Veronica was radiant, flashing a diamond ring that must have cost more than Daniel's annual salary. "It's stunning," I said, because what else could I say? "Daniel insisted on something special," Veronica said, kissing his cheek. I told him I'd be happy with anything, but he said I deserved the best. That didn't sound like Daniel, who had always been practical about money, saving carefully for the nonprofit he hoped to start. But love makes people do unusual things, I reasoned. Maybe he wanted to show Veronica he could provide the lifestyle she was accustomed to. Wedding planning revealed more shifts. Veronica had appeared to love our close family dynamic, but suddenly she was talking about expanding their social circle and building strategic alliances. The guest list grew from Daniel's initial vision of family and friends to hundreds of her professional contacts. "Think of it as a networking opportunity," she explained when I gently questioned the ballooning budget. "The connections we make at our wedding will pay dividends for years. Daniel's too talented to stay at his current level. He needs to be meeting decision-makers, potential investors for when he starts his own firm." "I thought he wanted to start a nonprofit," I said carefully. Veronica's laugh was tinkling, dismissive. "Oh, that's a lovely dream for later. But first, he needs to establish himself financially. You can't help others if you're struggling yourself, right?" The logic seemed sound, but it went against everything Robert and I had taught Daniel about service and priorities. Still, I held my tongue. Every mother thinks no one is good enough for her child. I didn't want to be the stereotype who drove her son away with constant criticism. As months passed, I watched my son transform. His wardrobe went from comfortable khakis and polos to designer suits. His reliable Honda was traded for a BMW. Veronica says image matters in business. He joined an exclusive gym, started golfing at the country club, began dropping names of people I'd never heard him mention before. "You're working so many evenings," I commented during one of our increasingly rare dinners alone. "Is everything okay at the firm?" "Everything's great," he assured me. "Veronica's introduced me to some potential clients. If even half of these leads pan out, I could make partner 2 years early." But he looked tired, stressed in a way I hadn't seen before. The easy smile that had always come naturally seemed forced. When I asked about his volunteer work at the community center, he admitted he'd had to cut back. "Veronica thinks I was spreading myself too thin," he explained. "She's probably right. I need to focus on my career right now." The wedding itself was everything Veronica had envisioned. A spectacular event at the Fairmont Country Club with ice sculptures, a 10-piece band, and food stations that could have fed a small village. I wore the modest navy dress I'd chosen, feeling out of place among the designer gowns and jewels. Daniel found me during the reception, sitting alone at a table while Veronica worked the room. "You okay, Mom? Just missing your father," I admitted. He would have been so proud today. Daniel's face softened. He would have loved the ceremony, wouldn't he? Simple, meaningful. He trailed off, looking around the opulent ballroom. This is all a bit much, isn't it? For a moment, I saw my real son, the one who understood that meaning mattered more than appearance. But then Veronica appeared, linking her arm through his. Daniel, darling, the Pembrokes want to meet you. They're considering a complete renovation of their estate. She barely glanced at me. Eleanor, you don't mind if I steal him away? And, just like that, the moment was gone. I spent the rest of the reception watching my son be paraded around like a prize, introduced not as the man Veronica loved, but as one of the city's rising engineering stars, and future partner at Steinberg. Associates. The pattern was set. In the years that followed, I saw Daniel less and less. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls went from daily to weekly to when he could find time. When I did see them, Veronica dominated the conversation, with talk of acquisitions, investments, and social climbing. We're looking at a house in Willowbrook, she announced during one visit. The estates section. It's a significant investment, but Daniel's bonus this year should cover the down payment. That's quite a distance from your office, I pointed, out to Daniel. Your commute will be over an hour, Veronica says, he began, then caught himself. We think it's worth it for the right neighborhood. Good for entertaining clients. Always what Veronica said, thought, wanted. My son's own voice grew quieter with each passing month. The nonprofit he'd dreamed of was never mentioned. His volunteer. Work ceased entirely. Even his friendships seemed to evaporate, replaced by what Veronica called strategic relationships. I tried talking to him once, carefully, during a rare moment alone. You seem different, sweetheart. Are you happy? Of course I'm happy, he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. I'm successful. I have a beautiful wife. We're building a great life. But is it the life you wanted? I pressed gently. He was quiet, for a long moment. Veronica knows what's best for us, he finally said. She has vision, Mom. She sees potential I didn't even know I had. What she saw, I realized later, was a talented, trusting man with a valuable skill set and a modest family. Fortune that could be leveraged into something more. She saw raw material to be shaped according to her ambitions. And she was patient, so patient, in her transformation of him. The last time I saw Daniel truly relaxed was 2 weeks before his death. He'd stopped by unexpectedly on a Saturday afternoon, alone. Veronica's at a spa weekend with clients, he explained. We sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and talking like we used to. For a few hours, he was just my son again, laughing at old memories, asking about my neighbors, even mentioning maybe getting back to volunteer work. I miss it, he admitted. Using my skills to actually help people instead of just making people richer. It's never too late to refocus, I suggested carefully. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that. About a lot of things, actually. Mom, there's something I need to talk to you about. Can I come by next weekend? There are some things. I need your advice. But next weekend never came. 5 days later, I received the call about the accident. And 3 days after we buried him, Veronica handed me a maid's uniform, finally dropping the mask she'd worn so carefully for 8 years. Standing in that kitchen at 6 a.m., preparing her breakfast while wearing the gray uniform of servitude, I thought about all the warning signs I'd missed or dismissed, her immediate interest in our family dynamics, the speed with which she'd isolated Daniel from his support system, the gradual replacement of his values with her ambitions. But I also thought about those final weeks, the USB drive hidden behind his photo, the investigator's business card, his urgent need to talk to me. My son had been waking up from her spell, starting to question the life she'd built around him like a prison of expectations. And now he was dead, and she was moving with shocking efficiency to liquidate his assets and erase his true legacy. The catalyst that had arrived in our lives 8 years ago had completed her transformation, not just of Daniel, but of everything he'd built and stood for. "Your eggs are getting cold," Veronica's voice cut through my memories. She stood in the doorway, already dressed for another day of meetings with mysterious business associates. "Really, Eleanor, I expect better attention to detail." "My apologies, Ms. Chambers," I said, playing my role while thinking of the meeting with Patricia that evening. The catalyst had done her damage, but the reaction was just beginning. And Veronica was about to learn that every action, especially cruel ones, had consequences she couldn't control. The surveillance cameras Veronica had mentioned weren't just in the garage. Over the next few days, as I performed my servant duties, with apparent submission, I mapped out an entire network of hidden cameras throughout the house. They were sophisticated, professionally installed, and based on dust patterns, had been there for months, long before Daniel's death. Why would a loving wife need to spy on her husband in his own home? This question haunted me as I scrubbed floors, prepared meals, and endured Veronica's increasingly cruel demands. Each day brought new humiliations, scrubbing the bathroom tiles with a toothbrush because she'd found an imaginary speck, rewashing already clean windows because the light hit them wrong, being forced to eat my meals standing in the kitchen because servants don't sit in my presence. But each indignity only sharpened my focus. I was building a comprehensive picture of Veronica's operations, and what I found was staggering. The meeting with Patricia Wong at the Riverside Diner had been illuminating. My former colleague had arrived with a thick folder and a grim expression. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry about Daniel," she'd said, gripping my hands across the worn Formica table. When I started looking into Veronica Chambers, I expected maybe some financial irregularities. What I found, it's much worse. Patricia had spread documents across the table, printouts, photographs, corporate records. First, Veronica Chambers doesn't exist, at least not before 2014. The woman you know was born Victoria Chelmsford in Newark. She has a sealed juvenile record, but I have contacts. Identity theft, fraud, targeting elderly victims. She reinvented herself after a stint in minimum security, created a new identity, and worked her way into pharmaceutical sales. My coffee had grown cold as I absorbed this information. The woman who'd charmed her way into our lives was a convicted criminal who'd specialized in exploiting vulnerable people. "There's more," Patricia continued. "She's been married twice before. Both husbands died in accidents within 2 years of marriage. Both left her everything. The first was a pharmaceutical executive who fell downstairs. The second died in a boating accident. Both had recently increased their life insurance policies." The pattern was clear, horrifying in its implications. "She's a black widow," I whispered. "That's what I suspect. But here's the interesting part. She's getting sloppy. The previous husbands were older, no close family to ask questions. Daniel was different. He was young, had friends and colleagues who cared. And based on what you've told me, he was starting to suspect something." Patricia had slid another document across the table. "I also found this. She's been in communication with Marcus Chen from Daniel's firm for over a year. Their relationship predates Daniel's death. In fact, there are hotel records." I'd closed my eyes, the final piece clicking into place. The Saidi affair, the planning, the convenient accident just as Daniel was preparing to investigate his wife. It wasn't just murder. It was a carefully orchestrated takeover of my son's life and legacy. "What do you need me to do?" Patricia had asked. "Keep investigating," I'd said, my voice steady despite my internal turmoil. "Document everything. And, Patricia, see if you can find out more about the accident. The official report said equipment failure, but—" "I'll look into it," she'd promised. "Eleanor, Be careful. If she's killed before. She thinks I'm a broken old woman, I'd replied. Let her keep thinking that while I gather evidence from inside. That had been a week ago. Since then, I'd played my role perfectly while systematically documenting everything in the house. The USB drive I'd found proved to be a gold mine. Daniel had been collecting evidence of Veronica's financial manipulations, her secret accounts, her communications with Marcus Chen. He'd known. My brilliant boy had figured out who he'd married and was preparing to expose her. The file labeled Divorce Strategy contained not just financial records, but a detailed timeline of Veronica's suspicious activities. He'd even noted the surveillance, cameras, writing. She's watching me. Need to be careful. Mom was right to be suspicious from the beginning, but Daniel had underestimated how far Veronica would go to protect her secrets. The morning of the revelation came exactly 2 weeks after the funeral. I was preparing Veronica's breakfast when she entered with Marcus Chen at her side. They were both dressed formally, and Veronica carried a briefcase that I recognized as Daniel's. Ah, Eleanor, she said with false brightness. Perfect timing. Marcus and I have some news to share. Set another place for breakfast. I complied silently, noting how comfortable Marcus seemed in the house, how he knew exactly where to find the coffee mugs. How long had this been going on? Eleanor, Veronica began once they were seated. Marcus and I wanted you to be the first to know. We're merging our professional interests. He's leaving Steinberg Associates to help me manage Daniel's estate and business ventures. The casual cruelty of the announcement, flaunting her relationship with Daniel's colleague in his own home at his own table, was breathtaking. But I simply nodded and refilled their coffee. In fact, Marcus added, barely able to contain his smirk, we're also announcing our engagement. A quiet ceremony next month. After an appropriate mourning period, of course. An appropriate mourning period. 3 weeks. Congratulations, I managed, my voice neutral. Veronica studied me with those cold eyes. You're taking this well, Eleanor. I expected resistance. What would be the point? I asked, playing the defeated servant perfectly. You hold all the cards? Yes, she agreed, satisfaction coloring her voice. I do. Which brings me to our next point. Marcus and I have decided to sell this house. The market is excellent right now, and we prefer something more modern. You have 2 weeks to make other arrangements. 2 weeks. After taking my apartment, reducing me to servitude, she was now casting me out entirely. I understand, I said quietly. Do you? Veronica leaned forward. Because I want to be very clear, Eleanor. Your time here is over. Daniel is gone, and with him, any obligation I might have felt toward you. You're old, you're useless, and frankly, your presence depresses me. Find somewhere else to be a parasite. There it was again. Parasite. Her favorite word for anyone who didn't serve her ambitions. However, Marcus interjected, we're not heartless. We'll provide a reference for your domestic skills. I'm sure someone will hire a woman your age for light housework. They laughed together, the sound sharp and ugly in the morning light. But their cruelty had made them careless. They'd revealed their timeline, their plans, their complete lack of concern about appearances. If I may be excused, I said carefully, I need to call about housing arrangements. Of course, Veronica waved dismissively. But finish your duties first. The floors won't clean themselves. I spent that morning following my usual routine while my mind raced. 2 weeks gave me a deadline. Whatever evidence I had needed to be deployed strategically and soon. But as I cleaned Daniel's former office, now converted into Veronica's personal workspace, I found the final piece of the puzzle, hidden in a locked drawer I'd managed to open with skills learned during my investigative career. I discovered a life insurance policy dated just 1 month before Daniel's death. The beneficiary, Veronica Chambers. The amount, $10 million. The witness signature, Marcus Chen. But more damning was the medical examination report attached. It showed Daniel in perfect health, with one notation. Subject expressed concerns about feeling unusually fatigued lately. Recommended blood work to rule out any issues. Blood work that was scheduled for the week after he died. I photographed everything, my hands steady despite my racing heart. The fatigue Daniel had mentioned. Had she been slowly poisoning him? Making him weak enough that an accident would seem plausible? That evening, I met Patricia again, this time joined by James Morrison, the private investigator Daniel had planned to hire. He was a solid man in his 50s with kind eyes and a grim expression. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said after Patricia introduced us. "I'm sorry I didn't get to help your son in time, but I've been investigating since Patricia contacted me." The construction site where Daniel died? 3 security cameras were mysteriously offline during the window of his accident. The equipment that failed? It had been serviced the day before. By a company that doesn't exist, the work order was forged. Moreover, Patricia added, I found evidence that Veronica and Marcus were in severe financial trouble. Bad investments, gambling debts to dangerous people. They needed money fast. Daniel's death solved all their problems. "We have enough for the police," Morrison said. "But we need to be strategic. Veronica has connections, and she's clearly willing to kill. We need to ensure she can't run or retaliate." I made my decision. She's planning to sell the house. There will be papers to sign, lawyers, probably a gathering to celebrate their engagement. She'll want to gloat, to show everyone how she's won. That's when we strike. Patricia nodded slowly. A controlled environment, witnesses. No way for her to escape or claim coercion. It could work. It will work, I said firmly. Because I'm going to make sure she invites everyone who matters. Daniel's colleagues, his friends, business associates. She won't be able to resist the opportunity to perform her victory lap. Over the next week, I played my role flawlessly while setting the stage. When Veronica mentioned the house sale, I meekly suggested she might want to host a gathering. Daniel would have wanted his friends to see you happy again. Her ego made her predictable. Of course she wanted an audience for her triumph. "That's actually not a terrible idea," she mused. "A sophisticated cocktail party to announce the engagement properly." "Yes, I like it. You can make yourself useful one last time by helping with preparations." The party was scheduled for Friday evening. Veronica spent the week in a whirlwind of planning, inviting everyone who mattered in Daniel's professional circle. She wanted them all to see her success, her new relationship, her complete control of Daniel's legacy. What she didn't know was that I'd been in contact with many of these people. Dr. Elaine Patterson, who'd worked with Daniel on community projects. Tom Rodriguez, his best friend from college who'd been mysteriously disinvited from gatherings in recent years. Sarah Kim, the attorney who'd helped Daniel draft the nonprofit plans Veronica had derailed. They all had questions about Daniel's death, about Veronica's rapid relationship with Marcus, about the changes they'd seen in their friend. They came to the party not to celebrate, but to seek answers. The night arrived. I'd spent the day preparing elegant appetizers and ensuring every detail was perfect. Veronica, dressed in a black cocktail dress that seemed inappropriately festive, for a recent widow, surveyed my work with satisfaction. "Well, Eleanor, you've finally proven somewhat useful," she said. "After tonight, you're free to go. I've left your final compensation on the kitchen counter. $1,000. That should get you into some sort of assisted living facility. $1,000 for 2 weeks of servitude and the loss of my son." Her final insult. The guests began arriving at 7. I recognized many faces from Daniel's funeral, but this time their expressions were curious rather than grief-stricken. They mingled uneasily, accepting champagne and exchanging worried glances. At 8 o'clock, Veronica clinked her glass for attention. Marcus stood beside her, his arm possessively around her waist. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying false warmth. "I know these past weeks have been difficult for everyone who loved Daniel. But life goes on, and I wanted to share some happy news with those who matter most." She held up her left hand, where a new diamond ring sparkled. "Marcus and I are engaged. I know it seems sudden, but grief has a way of clarifying what's important. Daniel would want me to be happy, to move forward, to continue building the legacy we started together." The room was silent, the discomfort palpable. But Veronica, lost in her own performance, didn't notice. "Furthermore," Marcus added, "we're excited to announce some changes to Daniel's company structure. With Veronica's business acumen and my engineering contacts, we're taking things in a new, more profitable direction." That's when I stepped forward, no longer in my servant's uniform but in my best suit, the one I'd worn to testify in federal court. "Actually, there's something else that needs to be announced tonight." Veronica's face went white. "Eleanor, you're supposed to be in the kitchen? Silent? Invisible?" I asked calmly. "No, Veronica. Or should I say, Victoria Chelmsford." Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus stepped forward aggressively, but James Morrison materialized from the crowd, his presence and bearing immediately identifying him as law enforcement. "Don't," Morrison warned quietly. "Victoria Chelmsford, you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Hartwell, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and identity theft." "This is ridiculous!" Veronica shrieked, all pretense of sophistication vanishing. "This old woman is delusional with grief. She's trying to frame me because she can't accept..." "Can't accept what?" I interrupted, pulling out a small recorder. "That you murdered my son for his life insurance? That you and Marcus planned this for months? That you slowly poisoned him to make an accident more plausible?" I hit play. Veronica's voice filled the room, a recording I'd captured just that morning when she thought I was cleaning the bedroom. "Once the old bitch is gone and the house is sold, we'll have enough to pay off the Chicago people and still live comfortably. Daniel's death was perfectly timed. Any longer and he would have exposed everything. Thank God for faulty equipment and a little help from our friend at the construction company." The room erupted. Several of Daniel's colleagues lunged toward Marcus, held back only by Morrison's partner stepping forward with backup officers who'd been waiting outside. "You recorded me illegally!" Veronica screamed. "That's inadmissible!" "Actually, Sarah," Kim spoke up, Daniel's attorney friend, "Connecticut is a one-party consent state. Eleanor was part of the conversation, making the recording perfectly legal. I should know. I helped write the state's surveillance statutes." Veronica's face cycled, through rage, disbelief, and finally, cold calculation. "You can't prove anything. Daniel's death was an accident. The insurance is legitimate. You're just a bitter old woman trying to..." "Trying to what?" Patricia Wong stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "Expose the truth? Because we have everything. Victoria, your previous identities, your 2 dead husbands, the forged work order at the construction site, the deleted security footage that we recovered from the backup servers, the poison in Daniel's system that the rushed autopsy missed, but the exhumation revealed." Exhumation. I'd authorized it just days before, providing hair samples I'd kept from Daniel's hairbrush to compare toxicology. The results had come back that morning. Slow-acting poison that would have caused exactly the fatigue Daniel had mentioned. "Most damning," Morrison added. "We have your partner from the construction company. Faced with murder charges, he was quite willing to testify about how you paid him to ensure Daniel would be under that specific piece of equipment when it failed." Marcus broke free and ran for the door, only to be tackled by officers in the foyer. Veronica stood frozen, her perfect facade finally completely shattered. "You were supposed to be nothing," she hissed at me as officers approached with handcuffs. A useless old woman living off your son's success. A parasite. No, I said quietly, meeting her eyes one last time. I'm a mother who loved her son. A professional who spent 35 years putting criminals like you behind bars. And the woman who made sure Daniel's real legacy, his kindness, his generosity, his dreams of helping others, will live on long after you're forgotten in prison. As they led her away, still screaming about lawyers and frame-ups, I felt my knees weaken. Tom Rodriguez caught my arm, steadying me, while Elaine Patterson brought me a chair. Mrs. Hartwell, Tom said, tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. We all knew something was wrong, but we didn't know how to help. Daniel tried to tell me once, but she isolated him, I said gently. Made him doubt his own instincts, his own friends. That's what predators like her do. The party guests, Daniel's true friends and colleagues, stayed for hours, not celebrating, but grieving properly this time, sharing stories about the real Daniel, the one who'd existed before Veronica's influence and who'd been trying to resurface before his death. Sarah Kim sat beside me as the house slowly emptied. Daniel left something with me, she said quietly, before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in Daniel's careful script. Mom, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I'm sorry I didn't listen to your instincts about Veronica from the beginning. You saw what I was too blind or too proud to see. I've discovered terrible things about the woman I married. By the time you read this, I hope the evidence I've gathered will be enough to expose her. But more importantly, I want you to know that you were right about everything, about what matters in life, about the importance of helping others, about the danger of losing yourself in someone else's ambitions, the house, the cars, the country club membership. None of it was ever me. I'm leaving everything to you with one request. Sell it all and use the money to create the nonprofit we always talked about. Help the families who can't afford structural assessments. Build safe spaces for children. Do all the things I should have been doing instead of chasing Veronica's version of success. You tried to teach me that we build our legacy through service, not status. I forgot that lesson for a while, but I never stopped believing it. Please, forgive me for the years I wasted and the worry I caused you. All my love. Daniel P.S. That young couple in 3B in your old building needs help with their rent. Maybe start there. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely now. Even in his final days, even while planning to expose his killer, Daniel had been thinking of others. The son I'd raised had never truly disappeared. He'd just been temporarily overshadowed. The aftermath moved quickly. Veronica and Marcus were both charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and multiple counts of fraud. The investigation revealed the full scope of their crimes, including the two previous husbands Patricia had discovered. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Marcus attempted to make a deal, offering to testify against Veronica in exchange for a reduced sentence. Veronica, true to form, tried to blame everything on Marcus, claiming she was another victim of his manipulation. But the evidence was too comprehensive, the paper trail too clear. The woman who'd thought herself too clever to be caught had been undone by her own greed and cruelty. The trial was swift. I testified not as a grieving mother, but as the forensic accountant who'd helped uncover the financial web that had trapped my son. I presented the evidence with the same calm professionalism I'd shown throughout my career, letting the facts speak louder than any emotional appeal. Veronica was sentenced to life without parole. Marcus received 40 years. The construction company accomplice got 25 years for his role in the murder. But justice, while necessary, couldn't bring Daniel back. What could honor him was fulfilling his final wishes. I sold the Willowbrook house, the cars, the country club membership, all the trappings of the life Veronica had forced on him. With the proceeds and the life insurance that rightfully came to me as Daniel's sole heir, I established the Daniel Robert Hartwell Foundation for community safety. The foundation does exactly what Daniel had dreamed of, providing free structural assessments for low-income families, building safe community spaces, and training young engineers from disadvantaged backgrounds. In its first year alone, we prevented 3 building collapses that could have killed dozens of people. Daniel's real friends, Tom, Elaine, Sarah, and others, serve on the board. We meet monthly, not in some corporate boardroom, but in the community center Daniel used to volunteer at, surrounded by the children and families his legacy now protects. The young couple from 3B that Daniel mentioned, they now manage one of the foundation's properties, providing affordable housing for families in need. They named their son Daniel, after the man whose final act of kindness changed their lives. As for me, I returned to my comfortable apartment. The lease Veronica had terminated was reinstated after the property management company learned of the circumstances. I'm surrounded by photos of my family, of Robert and Daniel as they truly were, not as Veronica tried to reshape them. Sometimes I wake at night, remembering those 2 weeks of servitude, the gray uniform, the cruel words. But then I think of Veronica in her orange jumpsuit, serving a life sentence while Daniel's true legacy grows stronger every day. She called me a parasite, but parasites take without giving. Everything I did was to protect and preserve what my son had built, to ensure his kindness and generosity would outlive us both. The real parasite was the woman who attached herself to a good man, drained him of life and joy, and thought she could discard his memory as easily as she'd discarded his mother. She learned too late that love, real love, the kind that builds rather than consumes, is stronger than any scheme or manipulation. Daniel was right in his letter. We build our legacy through service, not status. Through lifting others up, not tearing them down. Through love that gives rather than takes. And that legacy, unlike Veronica's cruel words and empty ambitions, will endure forever. The wake-up call I gave her wasn't just revealing her crimes. It was showing her that the woman she'd dismissed as weak and useless was actually the one person she should have feared most. A mother's love, armed with professional expertise and fueled by justice, is an unstoppable force. Somewhere in a federal prison, Veronica Chambers, Victoria Chelmsford, is learning that lesson every day for the rest of her life. And somewhere, in the community Daniel loved, children play safely in buildings his foundation has secured, never knowing that their laughter is the true monument to a good man who lost his way, but never lost his heart. That's the difference between parasites and parents. Parasites consume and move on. Parents nurture legacies that bloom long after they're gone. And Daniel's legacy, protected from those who would have perverted it, blooms more beautifully with each passing day. The evidence I'd gathered during those 2 weeks of servitude was damning, but what transformed it from suspicion to proof was a single phone call that came at 3 a.m., exactly 1 month after Daniel's funeral. I'd been lying awake, as had become my habit, reviewing everything I knew about Veronica's deceptions when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The voice was female, young, frightened. "My name is Jennifer Dalton. I worked at the construction site where your son died. I need to talk to you. I know what really happened." Within an hour, I was sitting across from a terrified 23-year-old woman in an all-night diner on the outskirts of town. Jennifer was the site's junior safety inspector, fresh out of college, working her first real job. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around a cup of coffee. "I've been having nightmares," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About your son. About what I saw. What I didn't report." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "Tell me everything." The story that poured out confirmed my worst suspicions and added horrifying new details. Jennifer had been doing routine morning inspections when she noticed someone tampering with the crane equipment, the same equipment that would fail catastrophically 6 hours later. "It was a man I didn't recognize," she said. "When I approached him, he showed me a work order, said he was from the servicing company. But something felt wrong. The way he was adjusting the hydraulic pins, it was like he was loosening them, not tightening them." She'd taken photos with her phone, documented the work order number, planning to verify it with her supervisor. But when she'd returned from her rounds, her supervisor had pulled her aside. He told me to forget what I'd seen, said the man was authorized, that it was a special inspection ordered by management. When I insisted on filing a report, he threatened my job, said I was too green to understand the complexities of site management. "Did you keep the photos?" I asked, my heart racing. Jennifer nodded, pulling out her phone. The images were clear. A man in a hard hat and work vest, his face partially visible, working on the exact equipment that had killed Daniel. The work order in the photo was readable, bearing a company name that Patricia's investigation had already revealed didn't exist. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "After the accident, I heard my supervisor on the phone. He was angry, saying something about this wasn't supposed to happen until the night shift, and she promised no one would be seriously hurt." Veronica had not only arranged Daniel's murder, but had originally planned it for when the site would be empty, making it look like equipment failure discovered the next morning. But something had gone wrong with the timing, and Daniel had died hours earlier than planned. "I've been carrying this guilt," Jennifer sobbed. "I could have saved him if I'd just insisted on filing that report. If I'd called the real service company to verify." "This isn't your fault," I said firmly. "You were threatened, manipulated by people in positions of power. But you can help now. Will you testify to what you saw?" Jennifer nodded, wiping her tears. "I kept everything. The photos, recordings, of my supervisor's threats, even a copy of the fake work order I managed to grab before they destroyed the originals. I knew someday someone would come asking. I was too scared to come forward myself." I called Patricia immediately, and within hours, Jennifer was in protective custody, her evidence secured. The photos she'd taken were enhanced by forensic experts, revealing clear images of the saboteur, a known associate of the criminal organizations to whom Veronica and Marcus owed money. But Jennifer's evidence was just the beginning of an avalanche of truth that began pouring forth. Her courage in coming forward inspired others who had been silent out of fear or confusion. Dr. Amanda Price, Daniel's physician, contacted me through my attorney. She'd been troubled by Daniel's sudden death, especially given his recent complaints of fatigue and dizziness. "I wanted to run more tests," she explained during our meeting. "His symptoms were consistent with chronic low-level poisoning. But Veronica insisted he was just overworked, that I was being alarmist. She even threatened to report me to the medical board for harassment if I continued to worry Daniel unnecessarily. The exhumation I'd authorized revealed exactly what Dr. Price had suspected: traces of ethylene glycol in Daniel's system, the kind found in antifreeze. Not enough to kill quickly, but sufficient to weaken him, make him dizzy and disoriented. The perfect setup for an accident. Marcus Chen's financial records, subpoenaed during the investigation, revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. He'd been embezzling from Steinberg Associates for 2 years, using his position to approve fraudulent invoices and redirect funds. But his gambling addiction had spiraled out of control, and he owed nearly $3 million to people who didn't accept bankruptcy as an answer. Veronica, meanwhile, had her own debts from failed investments and the lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. Together, they'd seen Daniel as their golden ticket: his life insurance, his assets, his successful career that Marcus could step into once he was gone. The digital forensics team found deleted text messages between them dating back 18 months. Marcus: "How much longer do we have to wait?" Veronica: "Patience. The policy needs to be in place for at least a year to avoid suspicion. Marcus. The Chicago people won't wait much longer. Veronica. They'll wait. Once Dee is gone, we'll have more than enough. The old woman will be easy to handle after. The casual cruelty of referring to my son as just Dee, the calculation of my own manipulation, it was all there in black and white. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Veronica's previous identity as Victoria Chelmsford. Patricia's continued investigation had uncovered not 2 but 3 previous marriages, all ending in suspicious deaths, all leaving Victoria significantly wealthier. The first husband, Roger Blackwood, had died in 1998 from a sudden heart attack, at age 52, despite no history of heart disease. The second, Thomas Chen, no relation to Marcus, had drowned in his pool in 2003, even though he was a competitive swimmer. The third, William Morrison, had fallen down a flight of stairs in 2008, breaking his neck. Each death had been ruled accidental. Each had occurred in a different state. Each had left Victoria with enough money to reinvent herself and move on to the next target. She'd refined her technique over 20 years, learning from each murder how to make the next one cleaner, less suspicious. Until Daniel. Until she'd gotten greedy and impatient, involved a desperate accomplice, and targeted a man whose mother had spent 35 years uncovering hidden crimes. The turning point came when Marcus, faced with the mounting evidence, broke completely. His attorney reached out with an offer: full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The story he told over 12 hours of recorded testimony was worse than even I had imagined. It started as Veronica's idea. He began, sweating profusely. Despite the cool interrogation room, she knew about my debts, offered to help if I assisted with her problem. She said Daniel was becoming suspicious, that he'd hired a private investigator, that we needed to act fast. He revealed that they'd been lovers for over 2 years, meeting at industry events while maintaining the facade of professional friendship. Veronica had deliberately pushed Daniel to hire Marcus's firm for projects, ensuring they had legitimate reasons to be in contact. She's done this before, Marcus continued. She bragged about it, called herself a black widow with a business degree. Said men were so easy to manipulate, give them a beautiful wife who made them feel successful, and they'd sign anything, believe anything. The poisoning had started 6 months before Daniel's death. Small amounts of antifreeze in his morning coffee, just enough to cause symptoms that mimicked stress and overwork. Veronica had played the concerned wife, urging him to rest more, to step back from his volunteer work, to let her handle more of their finances. She wanted him weak but functional, Marcus explained. Weak enough that an accident would be believable, but not so sick that he'd insist on medical tests that might reveal the poison. The construction site had been chosen carefully. Marcus had insider knowledge of the maintenance schedules, knew when certain equipment would be due for service. They'd paid off the site supervisor and hired a professional to sabotage the crane, planning for it to fail during the evening shift when the site would be mostly empty, an equipment failure discovered the next morning with no injuries, just enough to establish a pattern of negligence. But Daniel changed his inspection schedule at the last minute, Marcus said. Decided to do the morning rounds instead of evening. The saboteur had already done his work, couldn't undo it without raising suspicion. When Veronica got the call that Daniel was there early, she told them to let it happen. Said it was fate. Fate. My son's murder reduced to a scheduling conflict resolved by letting him die 6 hours early. Marcus also revealed the full extent of their financial planning. Veronica had been systematically transferring assets for months, selling Daniel's investments and parking the money in offshore accounts, liquidating valuable items and replacing them with replicas, even taking out additional insurance policies forged with Daniel's signature. She showed me spreadsheets, Marcus said. Had it all planned out. After Daniel's death, she'd wait a few months, then we'd marry. I'd take over his position at the firm, she'd have access to all his accounts. Within a year, we'd be free and clear with about $15 million between insurance, assets, and the house sale. What about me? I asked through the one-way glass, though I already knew the answer. Marcus's response chilled me to my core. You were phase 2. Veronica said grief and isolation would make you vulnerable. She'd establish control, maybe even, have you declared incompetent? Gain power of attorney? Your assets would be absorbed into the estate. She joked about it, said you'd probably be grateful for the attention. Lonely old women always were. The investigation expanded rapidly. The FBI became involved when the pattern of deaths across state lines emerged. Authorities in 3 states reopened the cases of Veronica's previous husbands. Financial crimes units traced the offshore accounts, finding not just the money stolen from Daniel, but funds from all her previous victims. The site supervisor who'd been paid off came forward, terrified of federal charges. He revealed that Veronica had visited the construction site twice in the weeks before Daniel's death, studying the equipment, asking detailed questions about safety protocols and inspection schedules. She knew exactly what she wanted, he said, knew which equipment would cause the most damage if it failed, knew how to make it look like maintenance negligence. It was like she'd done it before. She had, of course, different methods for different husbands, but always carefully planned, always looking like accidents that could be blamed on someone else's negligence. The trial became a sensation. The media dubbed Veronica the Black Widow of Willowbrook. Though I refused all interviews. This wasn't entertainment. It was justice for my son and potentially 3 other men who died for the crime of trusting the wrong woman. I testified for 6 hours, presenting the financial evidence I'd uncovered with the same precision I'd used throughout my career. But when the prosecutor asked me about finding the maid's uniform on my bed 3 days after my son's funeral, my professional composure finally cracked. She wanted to erase me, I said, tears flowing freely. Just like she'd erased Daniel, reduce me to nothing, a servant in what had been my son's home, wearing a uniform that marked me as less than human in her eyes. She called me a parasite, while she was the one who'd attached herself to my son and drained him of everything. His money, his health, his life. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict on all counts. Veronica Chambers, Victoria Chelmsford, was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Marcus Chen received 40 years. The site supervisor got 15 years. The saboteur, caught through Jennifer's photos, received 25 years. But justice, while necessary, couldn't heal the hole in my heart. What could honor Daniel was ensuring his true legacy lived on. The Daniel Robert Hartwell Foundation for Community Safety was established within 6 months of the trial's conclusion. Using the recovered assets, the legitimate insurance payments, and the proceeds from selling the Willowbrook house, we created something Daniel would have been proud of. The foundation provides free structural assessments for low-income families, builds safe community centers in underserved areas, and funds scholarships for engineering students from disadvantaged backgrounds who commit to community service. Jennifer Dalton, the young safety inspector whose courage helped break the case open, became our first scholarship recipient. She's now a leading advocate for construction site safety reform, ensuring that what happened to Daniel can never happen again through negligence or malice. Dr. Amanda Price joined our board, helping establish protocols for recognizing signs of domestic poisoning, a crime more common than most people realize. Her presentations to medical professionals have already saved 3 lives in our state alone. The foundation's work extends beyond just safety inspections. We've partnered with domestic violence organizations, recognizing that financial abuse and control often precede physical violence. We fund legal services for victims trying to escape abusive relationships, provide safe housing, and offer financial literacy programs to help people recognize and resist economic manipulation. Every month, I visit the community center Daniel used to volunteer at, now renamed in his honor. The Daniel Hartwell Memorial Center serves 500 children daily, providing after-school programs, tutoring, and safe spaces for play. The building itself is a marvel of accessible design, incorporating all the innovations Daniel had dreamed of, but never got to implement. Tom Rodriguez, Daniel's best friend, runs the center with a passion that would make Daniel proud. He always said buildings should lift people up, Tom told me during the dedication ceremony. This place does exactly that, literally with its ramps and elevators, and figuratively with its programs. The young couple from 3B that Daniel mentioned, in his letter, Maria and James Thompson, now manage affordable housing units the foundation has purchased and renovated. They've created a community where families support each other, where no one faces eviction for circumstances beyond their control, where children grow up secure and stable. Mr. Daniel saved us, Maria told me recently, her 3-year-old son playing at her feet. Even after he was gone, he saved us. We're paying it forward, helping other families the way he helped us. That's the ripple effect of genuine kindness. It spreads far beyond the initial act, creating waves of positive change that the original giver might never have imagined. 5 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It came from a federal prison in Colorado, where Veronica is serving her sentence. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Eleanor, she had written, I know I have no right to contact you. I've had 5 years to think about what I did, who I was. There's no excuse, no justification. I targeted good men, destroyed families, all for money that never brought me happiness. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness, I know that's impossible, but to tell you that I've begun counseling other inmates about financial abuse and manipulation. Maybe if I can prevent even one person from becoming what I was, Daniel's death won't have been entirely meaningless. I know you won't respond, and I don't deserve a response. I just wanted you to know that the wake-up call you gave me continues to reverberate. Victoria, I didn't respond. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. But I did feel a grim satisfaction that even in prison, the truth I'd exposed continued to have impact. The foundation has grown beyond my wildest dreams. We now operate in 6 states, have prevented dozens of building collapses, and provided safe housing for hundreds of families. Engineering schools compete to have their students intern with us, learning that their skills can serve more than just profit margins. At 82, I still go to the office every day. Not because I need to. We have excellent staff who could run things without me. But because this work is my connection to Daniel. Every family we help, every building we make safe, every young engineer we inspire to think beyond personal success, it's all Daniel's legacy, protected and nurtured. People sometimes ask if I regret those 2 weeks of servitude, if I wish I'd stood up to Veronica immediately instead of playing along with her cruel games. The answer is always no. Those 2 weeks of humiliation gave me access to the evidence that put a serial killer behind bars. The maid's uniform she forced me to wear became the costume that let me play the greatest role of my life. The helpless old woman who was actually gathering the rope for her to hang herself with. She called me a parasite, but parasites are creatures that take without giving, that weaken their hosts while contributing nothing. Everything I did, from the moment I put on that gray uniform to the day I testified in court, was to protect and preserve what my son had built, to ensure his values lived on, to transform tragedy into purpose. The real parasite was the woman, who attached herself to good men, drained them of life and resources, then moved on to the next victim. She fed on others' success while creating nothing, building nothing, contributing nothing but pain and loss. But even parasites serve a purpose in nature. They show us what to protect against, how to recognize danger, how to build immunity. Veronica's evil has made our foundation stronger, more vigilant, more determined to protect the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. In my apartment, I keep 2 photos on my mantle. One is of Daniel at his college graduation, full of hope and dreams of helping others. The other is from the Foundation's latest community center opening, showing hundreds of children playing in a building made safe by Daniel's legacy. Between those photos sits the maid's uniform, carefully preserved in a shadow box. Some might wonder why I keep such a painful reminder. But to me, it's not a symbol of humiliation. It's a trophy of war. It represents the moment I chose strategy over pride, patience over rage, justice over revenge. Every morning, I look at that uniform and remember the strength it took to put it on, to lower myself in appearance while gathering the power to strike. It reminds me that sometimes we must seem weak to reveal others' cruelty, must appear broken to make them overconfident, must play the role they assign us until we're ready to show our true selves. Veronica thought she was reducing me to nothing more than a servant. Instead, she gave me the perfect disguise for the most important investigation of my life. She thought grief and age made me helpless. Instead, they made me fearless. I had already lost what mattered most, so her threats held no power. In the end, the wake-up call I gave her wasn't just revealing her crimes or ensuring her conviction. It was showing her that the people she dismissed as worthless, the grieving mothers, the young safety inspectors, the struggling families, were actually the ones with real power, the power of truth, of courage, of community, of love that builds rather than destroys. Daniel's last letter asked me to forgive him for the years he wasted chasing Veronica's version of success. But there was nothing to forgive. He found his way back to his values before the end, recognized the danger he was in, tried to protect himself and others. The fact that evil won a temporary victory doesn't diminish the good he did or the legacy he left. That legacy lives on in every safe building, every protected family, every young engineer who chooses service over pure profit. It lives in Jennifer, Dalton's advocacy, in Dr. Price's medical protocols, in the Thompson family's community building. It lives in the thousands of people who sleep safely in buildings our foundation has inspected, who may never know Daniel's name but benefit from his values every day. The wake-up call I gave Veronica reverberates still, not just in her prison cell, but in every life saved by the changes her exposure brought about. Construction sites are safer because Jennifer spoke up. Domestic poisoning is detected earlier because Dr. Price created protocols. Financial abuse is recognized sooner because our foundation educates vulnerable populations. Evil thrives in shadows and silence. By dragging Veronica's crimes into the light, by refusing to be silenced by grief or intimidation, we created ripples of change that continue to spread. Every predator who thinks twice because they've heard of the Willowbrook Black Widow case, every victim who finds the courage to speak up, every professional who reports suspicious circumstances, they're all part of the wake-up call. As I write this, sitting in Daniel's childhood room, which I've kept exactly as it was, I can hear children playing in the courtyard of the affordable housing complex visible from the window. Their laughter rises like music, a symphony of safety and joy that Daniel's sacrifice made possible. Veronica took my son's life, but she couldn't take his legacy. She tried to reduce me to servitude, but instead gave me the tools for her destruction. She called me a parasite, but proved herself to be the only true parasite in our story. The wake-up call I gave her was simple. You cannot destroy love. You cannot erase goodness. You cannot reduce a mother to nothing when her child's memory gives her everything to fight for. You cannot win when your weapons are lies and manipulation, while ours are truth and justice. In the end, the servant's uniform hangs in my apartment not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof that sometimes the greatest strength comes from appearing weak, the greatest victories from seeming defeats, and the most powerful wake-up calls from those society dismisses as powerless. Daniel, my dear son, your mother kept her promise. I found the truth. I protected your legacy. And every day, in ways small and large, The wake-up call continues to sound for those who would prey on the good, the trusting, and the kind. The parasite is in prison. The servant is free. And love, the kind that builds, protects, and endures, has the one. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.